Welcome to This Week in Money. I'm Jim Goddard. Today, Ross Clark from ChartsandMarkets.com runs down the major markets. He tells us what kind of reaction there's been to the U.S. allowing a Bitcoin ETF. He checks out gold, crude, and the U.S. and Canadian dollars. The founder of Armstrong Economics, Martin Armstrong, tells us what he'll be talking about at the World Economic Outlook Conference in Vancouver next month. He tells us he's bullish on gold, he's concerned about the economic shape of European banks, and believes EVs could be an economic disaster. InsideTrackTrading.com President Eric Hadik examines the cycles affecting Bitcoin, the stock markets, interest rates, gold, and energy. Plus, at the end of the show, we'll have a company showcase update from RecycLiCo CEO Zarko Meseldzija. We'll talk to Ross Clark right after this.
RecycLiCo, making lithium-ion last forever. RecycLiCo's patented recycling process achieves up to 100% recovery of battery metals from lithium-ion batteries for electric vehicles, including cobalt, lithium, nickel, manganese, and aluminum. RecycLiCo Battery Materials Incorporated trades on the TSX Venture AMY, on the OTCQB AMY.ZF, and Frankfurt ID4. For more information, visit RecycLiCo.com or phone us at 778-574-4444. RecycLiCo, making lithium-ion last forever.
Welcome to This Week in Money, the source for market opinions. Here is Jim Goddard.
My guest is Ross Clark from ChartsandMarkets.com, where you'll find insightful market commentary and timely technical analysis. You can find him on X at Charts by Ross. Welcome back to the show.
Always a pleasure, Jim.
Ross, everything ETF this week?
Yeah, everything ETF. If you've been waiting for the ETFs to come out and get approval from the regulatory bodies, that's what happened as far as the Bitcoin was concerned. Talk about something that we had been looking at, the rumor for ages and ages here, and every one of the market participants was geared up with their products to come on board, and so there we were. Wednesday afternoon, the approval comes along, and Thursday, ETFs are up and trading. And if there ever was one of the old adages of buy the rumor and sell the news, this was it. Clearly, not only was it the outline ETFs now coming on board, the fact is that Bitcoin itself had retraced just a perfect 61.8% Fibonacci level at 48,555 this week, and this is now the fifth or sixth time that Bitcoin has had a Fibonacci retracement of this sort, going back to 2012. So it's a long ways back. We've had numerous examples, and every one of these faltered at the fib retracement level, and in this case, to have had it all the hype going into the new ETFs is just a classic spot to see the reversal. And I guess we closed off the week around 43, call it just under 44,000 on Bitcoin, so down a good 6,000 off the high. And if this is anything like the others, there should be an erosion process just around the corner. So, we always know the items that people get most excited about are the ones that produce the scariest results on the back end.
What's going on with gold?
With things happening in Yemen in the last 48 hours, it put a bit of a spark into the gold market and also into the oil market. But, these moves tend to be short-lived, and in this case in gold, we got a pretty nice piece of action. The gold market managed to rally about $50 off the lows from Thursday into Friday. We'll see what kind of follow-through it's got right now. We are, in this seasonal favorable window. We're at 44 bars in terms of trading days since the November low, and the seasonal rallies in this case tend to be anywhere from the mid-40s up into, the mid-60s in terms of the number of days in the rally. So this one's probably got the opportunity to spurt a little bit higher from where we are right now, but I'm always cautious when we see that it's a news-related item that creates the spark. So we'll just see what happens at this point. Good support down on the spot price around 2020. Let's see how that one manages to hold. We're still basically looking at this as the consolidation ahead of the final breakout to new all-time highs, but patience has been something that we've needed a lot of.
And has there been any difference in crude because of the trouble in the Middle East, or has it been surprisingly calm?
Well, actually, I think it got its little bit of a pop today. We did get up over $75 at one point, closed off the week at 72 3/4. But we're stuck in this basing phase that started the first part of December. We've been bantering back and forth as low as 68 and as high as 76. This is the classic basing period that you would look for in terms of crude oil. And usually at the latter part of January is when it comes to life after the base has been nicely formed. And in this case, I would think, if we can manage to get a close through 75, be looking at that as the definition of the breakout. And, would be looking for that rally to carry us typically into a March or April. So let's give it the chance to make its move here. And at this point, it hasn't done anything wrong. It's doing all that you would hope to see as it bases out.
How are the U.S. and Canadian dollars doing?
Well, the U.S. dollar did bottom out nicely with the sequential signals that we got here back about 3 weeks ago now. A weekly sequential 9, we were down at under 101. Had a good rally back to 104. Resistance, though, or we rallied back to 103. The resistance is at 104, and I think there's a pretty good chance that we go up and test that. This is, we're stuck in a trading range right at this point, but to say decent resistance. And as far as the Canadian dollar is concerned, it had that little pop up towards 76 and settled back now just under 75. It looks as though the dollar is just stuck in a trading range as well. There's nothing really there to push it. The commodities are doing nothing of significance. And if you look at the interest rate differentials, there's nothing there that's going to pull money into Canada from the U.S. or elsewhere.
Ross, thank you so much for the update.
Good to be with you, Jim.
My guest has been Ross Clark from ChartsandMarkets.com. You can find him on X at Charts by Ross. Coming up, Martin Armstrong, next on This Week in Money.
Always consult your investment professional before making any investment decision. Don't miss out. Stay informed. Receive the HowStreet.com weekly recap with thought-provoking podcasts, radio, and articles delivered to your inbox. Sign up for the HowStreet.com weekly recap on our homepage at HowStreet.com. This Week in Money is archived online at TalkDigitalNetwork.com.
Welcome back. My guest is Martin Armstrong, founder of Armstrong Economics, available online at Armstrongeconomics.com. He's speaking to us from Florida. Marty, Happy New Year, and welcome back to This Week in Money.
Well, thank you for inviting me. We've reached 2024, an interesting year.
And you'll be escaping the warm climes of Florida and coming here to Vancouver, where we're expecting lows down to minus 13 Celsius, which maybe for other people doesn't sound cold. For the West Coast, that's brutal. Anyway,
yeah,
you're going to be
true.
speaking at the World Outlook Financial Conference in Vancouver, February 2nd and 3rd. What will your topics be at the conference?
Well, it's going to be, I think, largely 2024, as people have to understand, is going to be really a chaotic year. It's more than just, like the elections we hear about, Biden, etc. 40% of the world is facing elections this year. And I mean, from Putin in Russia to, everywhere you go. Bangladesh, they're talking about it's a one-party rule now. Everywhere you look at in Pakistan, they have a former president. They put him in jail. So this is becoming a very common thing. Zelensky tried to do that in Ukraine, and he came up with the most brilliant decision. Well, as long as there's a war going on, we're going to suspend all elections. So he's just a dictator, and he has no incentive to even talk about peace, because then he'd have to have an election.
And so, what will your topic be at the conference, or is that the topic?
Well, it's basically you have to look at all of this from a collective standpoint on capital flows as you have wars developing. Well, besides Europe, you now have the Middle East, and at the same time, you have tensions rising in Asia. So all of that ends up moving capital to really to North America as people are parking things. So, that's why you see like the Dow still making new highs, and everybody keeps saying, "Oh, it's got to crash. It's got to crash." You have to look at things on a global scale. So that's really what we're going to be looking at.
In October, you published a report called The Next Jihad. Where can people purchase The Next Jihad, and what is The Next Jihad?
Well, that's on our site in our store. And the main thing you have to understand is that it seems as though what's going on, whatever old grudge that used to exist in one place or another, is all coming to a head in 2024. So, like Hamas attack, our sources have clearly been saying that look, 60% of the people that were actually attacking were not even Palestinians. So you're getting this jihad idea because you're having people, basically come in and willing to fight from different countries. Sort of what was going on with a lot of volunteers and mercenary, people in Ukraine. So that's a lot of the problem that we have. And this jihad is that we're getting to the point, it's a real religious type war, but it's not just against Christians, etc. You have Sunni versus Shiite, and that's part of the problem with the attacking the ships there going into the Suez Canal, because that has the bulk of Saudi Arabia's oil goes through there, and Saudi Arabia is a kingdom, so they're Sunni versus Shiite, which is Iran. So it's everywhere you look at this point.
What does Socrates see ahead for the Dow? It looks like it's on the way to 50,000 points. Do you think it's going to hit that?
Well, I don't know about 50,000, but we're definitely moving higher at this stage in the game. And what we're really kind of looking at here is January has been a very key target for us. So we should make at least a temporary high here, and then maybe pull back into February, possibly into March. And you're looking at another panic cycle on our models in September. This is quite incredible that we have two very sharp volatility periods in the same market in the same year. So it's basically showing this is going to be quite choppy. So I would expect a high in here soon, and then a pullback, and then you're going to be looking at probably war after at least after May, and May 7th is when the next president of Russia is sworn in. I know a lot of people are saying, oh, Putin, it's a rigged election or whatever, but that's not, necessarily true. I hope Putin wins, because if he steps out for health or whatever reason, the people behind him are far more aggressive. And And they are the ones that are screaming at him all along and saying, look, we're not at war with Ukraine. This is a war with NATO and the United States.
What's the latest on the real rate of inflation?
Well, I mean, we still see it rising basically in the double-digit area. I mean, would they take out so many things and looking at core levels that to try and bring it down? But real inflation, if you go back to the way it was before, you're still looking at least about 15%, in some areas as high as 20%. But you have to keep in mind that they took real estate out, replaced it with rents because real estate was going up too much. So you keep taking out energy, things of this nature that people actually do spend money on. So the average person is seeing inflation far greater than what the official numbers are.
Yeah, for example, it used to be the price of steak when they determined what the price of beef is. Now it's, I don't know, pork lips or something. You know, like the most disgusting piece of something you would find in a butcher shop.
Yeah, they changed things. I mean, Switzerland, when chocolate was going up too much, they switched it to the subsidized chocolate that they give, government employees, which doesn't go up. Look, every government does the same thing. And manipulating CPI in particular is very critical because these people in government automatically indexed government spending to all these agencies to the CPI. So that's why it doesn't show like it did in the 80s, 20%, things of that nature, because then these agencies would be increased in budgets automatically by 20%. So the way to reduce government spending was to manipulate the CPI down.
Does the price of energy, specifically crude, dictate price inflation?
It much more so in probably, I would say, a number of third world countries. I mean, crude here is again, we have a very major change in trend probably in 2025. And this year, we're probably still looking at, consolidation yet. I mean, the resistance in here is going to be at around $85, and the support's going to be at $65 for the year.
Is Socrates bullish or bearish on gold over the next few years?
Oh, it's still bullish on gold from a long-term perspective. I think you have to look at and understand a lot about gold and what it's really kind of doing. I mean, but we have a shot in here of hopefully forming a low in January, and that would be if we get a low in January that is under, I would say, 1985, then you're looking at that could be an important low for even for the year. But again, gold is more of responds more to geopolitical issues. The 2024 is a major turning point for gold, so I'd prefer to see that as a low, and then you would see if we get a low in 24, then you're looking at a rally basically for 3 years into 27.
How is the U.S. dollar looking?
Pretty much the same way. I mean, it's I don't really see that anything has significantly changed from the long-term views that we have basically put out. You're looking at you have to understand that war tends to support the dollar. What made the dollar in the first place was effectively World War I and World War II. So you have to understand here that we're looking at really the, I would say, capital flows moving into the U.S. really mainly as war continues to escalate, and that's what these people are effectively going to be doing here for quite some time. But we're looking at really the dollar still rising on a longer term basis. But once again, I mean, here in 24, we can see it make a temporary low and then change in direction, and we're looking at probably a very sharp rise in the dollar thereafter as particularly European countries begin to decline. The European banking crisis is far worse than anything you see in North America. And all of these things will contribute to a strong dollar. And you have to understand that the dollar and gold will actually go up together because, and even the stock market, because that's where capital is fleeing to. I mean, when you have North Korea shooting missiles off over Japan, we have a lot of clients in Japan, and they go, maybe we should be moving something to North America. I said, it's a good idea.
It's nice to have those two big ponds on either side.
Yes. That's, people have to understand. The U.S. was virtually bankrupt in 1896. It's when J.P. Morgan had to lend $100 million in gold to bail out the country. And then World War I comes, and then World War II. And then the U.S. became the reserve currency at 76% of the entire official world gold reserves, because everybody was running around blowing each other up. When you got tanks running down the street blowing up your banks, I don't think you're going to leave your money there.
Is credit being constricted?
In some banks, yes. But it's more, I would say, more so in Europe than in North America. But the few banks that we had that went down was largely because they were investing more on the long-term side. And you have an awful lot of these people, saying, oh, the Fed's going to lower rates. So buy bonds, lock in the high interest rates now. The number one inflationary cause is really war. That's what, was Vietnam War that broke Bretton Woods. And so all this idea that the Fed will lower interest rates and make, go back to zero and it'll be panacea for everybody, it's just not true.
When real estate markets collapse, how long after the peak does the waterfall price drop usually happen?
That usually will unfold within 2 to 3 years. But again, it's more, it depends where you're going and what you're talking about. Because, like, you take the United States, for example, there's a massive migration of people fleeing the blue states. California is the number one state they're all leaving. And so most of them are tending to go to Texas, particularly Austin. Here in Florida, I can tell you our traffic has at least doubled. It's getting very frustrating. I like down here, I could just go out and take me 15 minutes to get downtown, and now it takes me about an hour. So it's just... you have so many people fleeing, and even the IRS data showed that the high net worth people are actually moving. So Wall Street, a lot of the big, money earning operations have been moved to Miami already. So, I mean, you had Bezos, who lived over there in Seattle, who moved to Miami. You're looking at a tremendous amount of money being moved, and Miami's just going to be the new Wall Street.
What does Socrates see ahead for electric vehicles, and what exactly is Socrates for people who don't know?
Socrates is basically it's really the first artificial intelligence system I think that it's been around and actually functional for I guess almost 30-some years at this point. I created it. I've been a programmer, basically all my life. But as an international hedge fund manager, I understood, capital flows, and you have to look around the world. You can't forecast just gold and not look at anything else. You're going to lose your shirt. So I taught basically Socrates really how to analyze the world and come back with correlations and let me know what's going on. And it writes over 1,000 reports. It's covering, so many markets around the world, and it writes it all itself. So it's not human interaction with it or anything like that. And that's why we have so many institutional clients around the world. I mean, clearly we're the largest around, and mainly because they know it's not somebody's opinion as to, did I have too much to drink last night and I had a headache, so I didn't look at everything this morning or whatever. Socrates is basically monitoring the entire world all the time. And so it picks up the correlations and tells us. I mean, one of the things that impressed me so much was the early 80s. It had come out with a forecast and said that Britain was going to, its economy was going to flip. It was going to align itself more with North America and against continental Europe. And I thought that was, quite dramatic. And so I inquired into it, how are you coming to this conclusion? And the North Sea oil was just discovered in 1977. And by 1980-81, it was already saying this is changing the entire economic profile of Britain. So, I mean, this is what it does. So looking at climate change, I mean, it has all the disease data in there back centuries. Climate is in there. What these people are doing, like with climate change, is just absolute nonsense. They say, oh, gee, it used to be colder, so it got warmer after 1850, so it must be, therefore, the Industrial Revolution. Well, did they ever look at anything before then? I mean, we were coming out of the mini ice age. So anything getting warmer, and what caused it? It's a natural cycle. And I mean, there have been ice ages before and warming periods before, and people didn't have fossil fuels or anything like, of that nature. We have, the sun beats like your heart. And I'm sorry, but you basically put in, all the data going back thousands of years, and you see the cycle. We're heading more into a colder period. And that will, die out and start to warm up again, after 2032. But most of your civilization expands during warming periods, and they contract during cold periods. Disease cycles. When it gets cold, that's when you also have plagues. Why? Because even, one of the founding fathers of the United States, John Adams, you can Google it. I mean, he wrote a letter to his wife basically saying the ground is frozen 2 feet deep and we can't plant anything. So malnutrition takes place, and that's when the disease cycles turn up. I mean, they're all connected. And the same thing with volcanoes. And there's over 50 volcanoes simultaneously erupting at this point in time. And, the computer correlated that it shows that basically volcano activity increases when you get solar minimum coming from the sun. So what happens is that's when, if you get too much volcanoes basically throwing ash up, it blocks the sun and it turns colder. There's a book you can probably buy, 1816, The Year Without a Summer. I think it was Tambora that erupted at that point in time, and then what happened was it was snowing in New York City in July. It's also why Napoleon was defeated. He was defeated really by volcanoes. I mean, he had troops of over 600,000 when he invaded Russia, and he left with 27,000. I mean, that's pretty cold.
So what's the future for EVs?
Look, we have clients there in Oslo. They just said it got so cold, the electric buses would not work. And
that just happened in Edmonton, Alberta as well.
Yeah, I mean, these people that think that you can replace fossil fuels and go all electric, I mean, you know, there's no evidence showing that this is even a serious problem. But putting that much, you know, on the power grid when Russia has EPM bombs, they could take down the entire power grid like that. And then you have these governments pushing for eliminating physical money and going to electronic money, the central bank digital currency stuff. And if the power grid goes down, guess what? You can't even buy food. I mean, I don't know, honestly, if we have the stupidest people in governments around the world or what, but this is really getting out of hand. But EVs, you know, the dealers they wrote to Biden and saying, look, you got to change these rules. We got so many of these electric vehicles and people aren't buying them.
In British Columbia, people who've bought electric cars are finding out after their battery gets damaged, it's $60,000 to replace that battery. Their car only costs $50,000.
Well, I mean, here in Florida, if there was a hurricane, I mean, my next-door neighbor has 2 Teslas, and I tease him. I said, well, you know, your wife and the kid can get in my car. I can tie you to the top, and you can keep your mouth open and get a lot of bugs for protein, you know. How far could they go? You know, 200 miles is not very far.
Yeah, also in British Columbia, a report says after next year we'll have to import power. Our hydro dams can't keep up. But we're supposed to buy only electric cars by the year 2035. Only electric cars available.
Turning into an economic disaster. As we head into 2032, whatever the stupid decision they could have made, they have done. They want war because they know they can't even fund the budgets anymore. And the way out is always war. And that's why you see all this tension rising. They've been borrowing money year after year since World War II with zero intention of ever paying anything back. I mean, why are we borrowing if there's no intention of ever paying off the debts? And they just look at you in meetings and they go, well, we're the government. I say, oh, yeah, okay, fine. Do you realize how governments fail? When you sell new debt to pay off the old and nobody buys it, then you're in trouble.
What's the difference between revolution and civil war, and are we likely to see either one in Canada or the U.S.?
Well, it depends. I mean, you certainly have civil unrest coming, and civil unrest can certainly lead to civil war or revolution. It depends whether or not you decide to go with arms against it or whatever, like they did in the United States. But you still have like these people that think about, oh, one world government will eliminate war. I mean, that's absolute nonsense. If you just looked at Rome, okay, fine, it was one government. How many civil wars did they have? You know, it depends upon if the centralized government tries to send in an army to prevent the separation. But we have many different cultures and effectively economies. I mean, just look at the battle over abortion. You have the middle of the country, which they call the Bible Belt, feels that is against their religion. And you have places like California and New York and said, well, we don't care about that. We want it our way. You know, you end up in conflicts, and you know, that's the whole problem. So civil war is possible when you want to try and retain it, the unity, as they did in the U.S. Civil War. But that's what leads to revolution, to a separation of countries like, United States and Canada separated from Europe. But I mean, this is what we're heading into. There's definitely going to be a lot more civil unrest in 25. It's going to rise dramatically because, as I said, you've got 40% of the world going into election cycles here. And you take the U.S. election, I don't care who wins. Neither side is going to accept what the other one does. California just said, okay, fine, you can download a ballot and mail it in for the election, and and that's not going to create all kinds of problems. At least, it was mail-in ballots. You had to request one, it was mailed to you. Now, who knows how many people can download it and send in multiple copies. I mean, it's just, I don't know. It's like whatever stupid decision they can make, they do. But we're looking at really rising tensions. I mean, just, people don't really look so much at Ukraine and what has really been cited there. Zelensky basically has just reversed all their Orthodox religion and said, no, Christmas, we're going to adopt the West side, December 25th. He's outlawed their language, and you can't speak Russian in Ukraine. And people wonder why there's a civil war there. I mean, can you imagine what if Canada stood up and said, okay, fine, we're going to outlaw French, or the United States said we're going to outlaw Spanish? I mean, you're asking for trouble when you start doing stuff like that.
The swamp is exposing itself. Trucker and farmer protests in Europe are massive, yet ignored by the fake news. Do you think we'll see trucker and farmer protests in Canada and the U.S.? In the Netherlands, for example, they've declared war against nitrogen. They have perhaps the most productive farmers in the world.
The Netherlands, I mean, the number one export has been food. And it's like they don't understand what they're doing. And you just listen to this stuff about nitrogen, and climate change, whatever. You're going to create basically food shortages. And that's what's going to really come out of this. And then you're going to have civil unrest. People are going to be starving in different countries. I mean, this is, this whole climate change agenda is absolute nonsense. And when the UN had this climate change conference, look at it. They've refused to allow anybody to disagree to even speak. That's not democracy.
Is a potential breakup of the United States edging closer and closer?
Yes. I mean, look, we're going to see that. Just look at the political views of California versus Florida. I mean, California's like a foreign country anymore. It's just completely different. You can't take a country and divide it so starkly like this and expect it to stand. I mean, even Abraham Lincoln said a country divided cannot stand.
Do you think China and Russia are cheering for the U.S. to break up?
I don't know if they're cheering for that, but, look, the stupidity of people in power is limitless. We have these neocons that are bashing China over Taiwan. Well, China happened to be the largest holder of U.S. debt. They've been selling off billions all the time. So this is why we're heading into a sovereign debt crisis. These idiots, by bashing them and bashing China in general, and then Russia on top of that, if they do not buy the debt, who is going to buy it? When you can no longer sell the new debt to pay off the old, that's when the sovereign debt crisis comes. And these people, the problem is you have climate change people that only look at their agenda. Oh, we have to outlaw all gas stoves. Or gas was fine, 5 years ago, was cleaner than fossil fuels, the cleanest of the fossil fuels. Now all of a sudden it's evil. And then, they want to reduce cows. We're supposed to eat lab meat. because cows are one of the top 10 sources of methane, and it's just insane. And then you go with this neocon stuff. They're only looking at war. That's all they care about. And that's why I said what Socrates does, it correlates everything. Nobody's doing that. They just, each one has its own agenda, and they don't look at, okay, fine, if I do this agenda, what's going to happen to something else? That they could care less. And that's why we're in this crisis. Everybody's just that, the climate change people could care less. And that's all they're focused on. And they have no clue that you eliminate fossil fuels as fast as they want, and you've got a major, major civil unrest coming. I mean, people are going to be starving. They're not even going to be able to buy heat. And then you had, Kerry over there in Dubai saying, it's air conditioning. People really shouldn't have air conditioning. I mean, these people are nuts, completely nuts.
Are we near peak Marxism?
Yes. I mean, look, Russia and China were communist and they collapsed. This is simply our turn. All right. I mean, I was invited by China, kind of helping them actually become capitalist, and I had met with them. They took me to this facility, and they were monitoring absolutely everything. There were 249 varieties of tea. I never even knew there were that many. And they weren't interfering, but it was more or less they were studying everything, and I had to answer basic questions like, well, why is this tea selling for like $1 here but $5 over there? I said, well, where is it grown? And I said, well, first thing you have is transportation costs. And it's like, oh, yeah, okay, and then I said people would then pay more for something that they like better than the other one. And where in communism, if it was $1 in that one place, it's going to be $1 in the other place, even if it costs you $10 to get there. That's the whole equality idea, and we have this stupid argument again. It's jobs pay more based upon the quantity of people that can do it. Simple as that. How many people can be really a brain surgeon?
Are the Democrats finding new ways to rig elections in time for November?
Oh, yes. I mean, I think this election is, like I said, I don't see either side accepting it. And I would say the difference is 30 years ago, they at least tried to pretend that they were honest and legitimate. I mean, today they don't even care. I mean, you have Biden saying we have to take Trump off the ballots, and at the same time, we're defending democracy. How do you do that? If you want to defeat Trump, you should do it at the ballot, and not take him off so that nobody can vote for him. I mean, this is just insane. But it's not just the Democrats. You're talking about the deep state here, and they were clearly involved in January 6th, and most people don't look at the timeline. Once, it's been fairly reported on that the FBI was involved in January 6th, and by just encouraging people to walk into the building, that allowed, Pelosi to suspend the count and then adopt emergency rules so that nobody could object. They're doing this in the WHO. The WHO, they were supposed to have all objections in by January 27th. And, we're not going to be able to make that. So they're just going to ignore that and vote in May. This is dictatorial. And it's a sad statement, but, there's plenty of videos showing people being escorted into the Capitol building on January 6th. And they needed this to try and stop Trump. Why are they so against Trump? It's the same thing with Kennedy, with RFK. They don't want anybody who's not from Washington. They don't really care if you're a Republican or Democrat. It's like I said, I was down there when Reagan was elected, and they were beside themselves. And that was the first time I encountered it. And I said, what's the problem? He said, oh, you don't understand. I said, what don't I understand? Oh, he's just the governor. I said, yeah, we're going to have to train him. That's their view. So if you look at Biden, he gets Camilla, she's from the Senate. All right, you look at Trump, we put in there, oh, you got to pick somebody from Washington, he picks Pence. They don't want anybody from outside their own sandbox. And they don't care really if they're, Republican or Democrat. So, and Trump was against war. He was in favor of pulling out of NATO because we're the only ones that were funding it. And the deep state doesn't like that. They want war.
Do you think enough people are waking up to the UN, WHO, WEF takeover of the world?
Yes, I think it's clearly moving in that direction. And what causes it more for people to wake up is when they start seeing changes that's actually affecting their lives. It's inflation, that's, regulations. They're trying to control absolutely everything. And, Biden just put in new laws in the United States on January 1st. If you own any small business, you have to report who you are, where you live. And if you move, you have to inform the government, hey, I just sold my house, I bought another one. They want detail down to absolutely everything. The CBDC stuff is, you and your wife go out and you hire this 16-year-old girl next door to babysit. What'd you give her? Did she pay her taxes? How is this? To them, they would not have a problem if we all paid our taxes and whatever they think is, I've actually heard some politicians in Vancouver say that everything we earn is actually the government's and they decide what we're allowed to keep. This is your Marxist views that you were talking about.
Are we likely to see a big market ahead for big pharma?
Our model has been showing that despite everything else, you look at Pfizer, et cetera, and stocks going into a crash mode, basically. There's far too many deaths, and there's a lot more analysis coming out now showing that. And it's where I go get my hair cut. I mean, there's two elderly women, and both of them had their son-in-laws in their 20s. Both of them died after being vaccinated. The girl next door lives next to me with her husband. She got vaccinated after she had COVID because they were going on a family cruise. The very next day, they took her out of here in an ambulance. I mean, thank God she survived, but she almost died. I mean, do you go get a flu shot after you had the flu? I mean, this was insane when you start having governments demanding things and, oh, you can't come in here unless you've been vaccinated. Well, I already had COVID. That doesn't count. I mean, you don't get, people involved from government dictating that. Once that happened, it had nothing to do with disease or anything else. This was all about control.
Here in BC, we'll be having a provincial election this year. Last election, mail-in ballots were pushed. Have mail-in ballots been tied to voter fraud, and are there ways to prevent mail-in voter fraud?
Look, they require that anymore. The joke, about you look at the city of Chicago. The joke for decades has been that everybody that ever died in Chicago still votes. It's standard in every election. There's always fraud. It's what's going to happen this time. You're looking at it's just on steroids. Could
the history books be full of lies?
Well, it really depends what you're talking about. But history, it tends to be written by the victors. And look, I had to read The Great Crash by Galbraith when I was in high school. And then I stumbled upon Herbert Hoover's memoirs, found it in an antique bookstore in London. When I read it, Galbraith never mentioned anything about government defaults. And here, you read 1931, which you can get for, online for free right now, of Herbert Hoover's memoirs. I mean, every country, all of Europe basically defaulted. Britain went into a moratorium. They came out of it. South America defaulted. I mean, you can buy, bonds that China defaulted, on eBay. And none of this was mentioned. It's always evil corporations. Well, the biggest losses were sovereign debt and have wiped out 9,000 banks, but then nobody wants to talk about that.
Who do you think Trump will pick for a running mate?
If I were him, I would pick JFK. Mainly because, at least the two of them are outsiders, and I think that's what's going to, you're going to need that. But I would be very concerned if I were Trump, because honestly, there's so much at stake at this point that he's well ahead of the polls, and I fully understand that. And I get emails to people that hated him before, but now they realize they're going to vote for him because they hate everybody else more. But I wouldn't put it past them if they try to assassinate him. They're doing everything they possibly can to imprison him. And I mean, this is outrageous, but, so the more they've attacked him, they're making him a martyr. And the more they attack him, the higher he rises in the polls. So, and they can't stop. They don't know what else to do. So I think the final solution to them is I would be very concerned is they don't try to assassinate him.
Are there body doubles of Joe Biden, Justin Trudeau, and many others? And if there is, what's going on?
Well, that has been common for security reasons. Who knows at this point in time? I mean, they're all pretty much on the same agenda, and this has all been propagated by the World Economic Forum. Like I say, it's Klaus Schwab. He is a control freak. I mean, you make one mistake working there at the WEF, and you got a real problem. He is just that way, and he's taking that idea and putting it onto the world, and that's what these CBDCs are all about. This idea of a one world government using climate change for authoritarian purposes. They don't really care about the climate. This is all about, nobody can do this by themselves, so we have to have a centralized control and power. This is it. I mean, Klaus even has a picture of a bust of Lenin on his bookshelf. I mean, this is what he is. He is a control freak, and he's just taking this idea forward. I've been on the opposite side of tables from him, and what else can I say? I mean, he has this economic theory. He has done very well at selling it to everybody else, and I've told these same people, look, this is going to fall. You can't continue to run deficits like this. And Klaus gives them the opposite side. Well, look, you can default, we can seize everything, and you can still retain power and get more. My way, they got to relinquish power. So they choose Schwab's way.
Is Socrates seeing any panic cycles ahead?
Yes, it's certainly... January is a very important turning point in general. Going into February on a global scale, the next one really is May, and I mean that is tied into the WHO, where they're going to try and vote for this authoritarian view that they will declare pandemics and everybody's got to comply. I mean, they don't have an army to send in to force compliance, but the scuttlebutt is what they'll do is they'll argue for sanctions against countries being put in by the UN. That if you don't comply with their mandates, your country will have sanctions and won't be able to trade or do different things. So, I mean, this is part of the whole problem. But So like I said, 2024, we're going to have an interesting time. I would be careful with May, and then the next real panic cycle period is September, October.
Martin, where can people follow you?
Armstrong.Economics.com. You can go there. We don't sell advertising, so you don't have to keep clicking off ads, and you don't have to register just to get in. So we try to keep it as an open forum so everybody can actually go in and look, and it's free.
Martin, thank you so much for being on This Week in Money.
Well, it's always a pleasure. Thank you for inviting me.
My guest has been Martin Armstrong, founder of Armstrong Economics, available online at Armstrong.Economics.com. He was speaking to us from Florida. Coming up, Eric Hadik, next on This Week in Money.
RecycLiCo, making lithium-ion last forever. RecycLiCo's patented recycling process achieves up to 100% recovery of battery metals from lithium-ion batteries for electric vehicles, including cobalt, lithium, nickel, manganese, and aluminum. RecycLiCo Battery Materials Incorporated trades on the TSX Venture AMY, on the OTCQB AMY.ZF, and Frankfurt ID4. For more information, visit RecycLiCo.com or phone us at 778-574-4444. RecycLiCo, making lithium-ion last forever.
This Week in Money is archived online at talkdigitalnetwork.com.
Welcome back. My guest is Eric Hadik, CEO and president of InsideTrackTrading.com. He's speaking to us from Central California near Fresno. Welcome back to This Week in Money.
Oh, thanks for having me back, Jim. Hope you had a good New Year.
Oh, it was excellent. I went nowhere and went to bed right after popping a bottle of bubbly, and that was it. No fireworks in Vancouver. No fun city once again. It's a beautiful city, but don't expect a great nightlife here. The city hates it. Anyway, I don't know if they're popping champagne corks over this. With Bitcoin now getting ETF status in the U.S. Now, one of our guests who regularly appears on House Street, Mike Swanson, said, if there's an ETF, that means you can short Bitcoin now. Now, where is Bitcoin in its cycle, and is this news bullish or bearish?
Well, first I would address that point. That's exactly it, and that's what I was saying leading into this week. As they were pretty sure there was going to be SEC approval, that, and all the media is saying, oh, this is going to let the little guy be able to buy Bitcoin easier and with less money and blah, blah, blah. And I said, okay, it's also going to allow the little guy and the institutions to sell short Bitcoin much easier. So, how is that necessarily a all-out bullish thing? And it was a perfect example of buy the rumor, sell the fact type of thing. So we're just, for the last 3 months, my work has said that Bitcoin needed to spike above 45,000 before we would see a top. And then in early December, some of the indicators really kind of honed that target, and most of my work was saying 47 to 48,000 was where Bitcoin should peak. Well, we've just Monday's highest daily close on the futures and some of the cash that they actually have a open and closing structure to give more accurate data. Those high closes were right in the 47,000 range. We've now got a spike up just above 49,000 intraday, and it's the perfect time to sell the fact and look for a correction here. It doesn't mean that, and when I'm talking about selling the fact, as I've said to my readers, yes, this is a time to take some profits on the buy signals that were generated in mid and late September, but there's more work that would need to be done before it actually generated some sort of sell short signal. So we're definitely in the midst of an upcycle. There are some weekly and monthly cycles that say we could still see an additional spike high in February or March. But from a price and wave perspective, Bitcoin has fulfilled almost everything expected and everything necessary to set a fairly significant top in this time frame and in this specific price zone. So I think we're very close to a top, and even the weekly close should corroborate that. So I'll be watching that closely.
Eric, in the past, you said Bitcoin seems to follow one of the stock markets pretty closely. Which market is that?
I haven't shown as much of a correlation. I know that some of the general consensus is that it has often moved a little closer with the Russell 2000. I've seen that correlation come and go, ebb and flow. But it is kind of interesting that since the beginning of the year, you've had different stock indexes starting to diverge from one another. You had an initial sell-off in the first few days of January. Then you had your larger cap and more followed indexes, the Dow Industrials, the S&P 500, the NASDAQ 100, all heading back to their highs, even as markets like the Russell 2000, S&P Mid-Cap, Dow Transportation just kind of went sideways, creating a little bit of a divergence here and setting the stage for a little bit more downside. So that could be something that perhaps goes along with some profit-taking in Bitcoin, but I don't see a strong correlation there. I see some on again, off again coincidence with the two of them.
Gold often competes with cryptos for attention. Gold rallied into early December, topped right where you said it would. What is the 2024 outlook for metals?
I still think that gold and silver are coming off of major bottoms in late 2022. That was the recurrence of a very consistent 7-year cycle in gold, along with many corroborating cycles. But it came exactly 7 years from the late 2015 low, which was exactly 7 years from the late 2008 low, which was 7 years from the 2001 low. So we have a very consistent cycle there. But you also have gold and silver entering into intermediate 6 to 12 month or longer bullish cycles following cycle lows in October of 2023. So you've got a series of ascending lows that are certainly supporting gold and silver. And on a more near-term basis, yes, there was my expectation that gold would surge into early December and peak around 2150. That high should hold for a while, but I do think ultimately it's going to be taken out, and that's when we're going to see some real acceleration higher in the metals. So all in all, I've got a more bullish outlook. But as you said, there is often this kind of competing mechanism between the dollar and its anti-dollar adversaries, and the two primary ones are your precious metals or your cryptos. But even within that competitive mindset, you've often got room for only one of them, cryptos or precious metals, to be entering accelerated moves one at a time. So we've just seen this big surge in Bitcoin leading into this week. Gold has been just kind of stable. The dollar has been also kind of stabilizing near its lows. But my work is showing that Bitcoin should be peaking right in here between January 10th and 12th, and that gold is ready for another wave up, even as some daily cycles are bottoming in gold January 10th, 11th, 12th. So even as the dollar is staying under pressure, you've got the bullish psychology kind of alternating back and forth between cryptos and precious metals, And I think we're entering a short-term phase now where precious metals will start to gain again.
What are the key cycles you're watching in stocks?
There are several weekly and monthly cycles that are coming into play in early 2024. But the ones that really have my attention are a couple of multi-year cycles. One significantly smaller or shorter than the other. But the first one is a very consistent 2-year cycle that I've written about in stock indexes. And even the most recent phases, when stocks generated some buy signals in late October of 2023, it was very similar and reinforced my expectations that equity should see a sharp rally into the end of the year and into January before an intermediate peak was likely. And really, that's just repeating what you've seen in 2017, 2018. Stocks saw a strong rally from October into January and then set a multi-month peak. In 2020, stocks saw a strong rally from October 2019 into January 2020 and then set a multi-month peak. In 2022, stocks saw a strong rally from October 2021 into January 2022 and then set a multi-month and multi-year peak in a lot of stocks. And now in 2024, you're set up for the same thing, and stocks have obliged and fulfilled that expectation. So on a 1 to 2 month basis, I think we're definitely in for a peak here in stocks. But there's a broader overriding cycle, which I think could ultimately create a much more significant peak. And that is a 17-year cycle that I've discussed on and off for the last 20, 25 years. And I wrote a lot about it leading into the 2000 peak in stocks. And then even more, did a whole series of articles and reports in 2006, 2007, explaining why 2007 would usher in a multi-year peak in stocks and was projecting a 1 to 3 year drop of 35 to 50%. And that is a recurring phenomenon that you go back to 1939, you had a peak like that in stocks and a strong sell-off into 42. In 1956, you had stocks doing the same thing. 17 years later, in 1973, you had stocks peak and then drop 50%. In 1990, you had stocks peak and see about a 20-25% sell-off. 2007 was expected to do the same thing, and now we're coming into 2024, where that 17-year cycle is back and expected to do something similar. But the other parallel in there that I didn't mention, those dates also time major Middle East conflicts. And you look back to 1939, then you look to 56, which was the Suez Crisis, 1973, Yom Kippur War, 1990, the Iraq invasion of Kuwait and the start of Persian Gulf War. So this Middle East conflict war cycle has also reverberated on that same 17-year cycle basis, and 2024, 2025 fits with that cycle perfectly. And I've been talking about this since long before the events of October of last year. So they appear to be just the opening salvo of what we could see in the Middle East over the next couple years.
What are the key cycles you're watching for interest rates and real estate?
Well, it's funny because interest rates, bonds, real estate have also had some of the same 17-year cycle frequency. And one of the things that I was explaining to my readers back in October was this parallel to previous times, both in bonds and in interest rates and the Fed funds rate. And what I wrote back there, and which is coming to fruition is that in the third quarter of 2006, you saw the Fed funds rate target rate peak at 5.25%. That completed a 3-year surge in interest rates, and it was at the same time a major real estate peak was taking hold. In third quarter of 2023, exactly 17 years later, the Fed funds target rate was peaking just above 5.25%. That was completing a 3-year surge in interest rates, and real estate was showing signs of a major top. And if you go back even before 2006, 17 years earlier, third quarter of 1989, Fed's fund rate peaked. It was just below 10% then, but it was completing a 3-year surge in interest rates. So you have this 17-year cycle that has timed interest rate shifts and extremes. And one of the other things I was discussing was a broad view of real estate. Obviously, that's something that has so many other factors, so many regional deviations from one area to another. But just looking at some general data for the median home prices in the U.S., and those median home prices have timed multi-year peaks in 1955, 17 years later in 1972, 17 years later in 1989, 17 years later in 2006, and 17 years later we have late 2023 with real estate at extreme upside levels. You also have the housing affordability index, which just dropped to its lowest low. The previous low was set exactly 17 years ago. So you have a recurring 17-year cycle even in interest rates, real estate, and many of the corroborating factors. So it's something that is certainly worth paying attention to over the next couple years.
Following the peak in home prices, at what point in the cycle is the price drop waterfall likely to happen?
Well, that usually takes a little bit of time, and there are some factors that more linked to interest rates and dollar and some other analysis I do that are giving me a little bit of an idea of when you could see that, but that's something that I'm really needing to flesh out my analysis a little bit more before I start discussing that. But I think that there is a recurring time that's fairly consistent when you do see more of that accelerated drop. So I'll certainly be open to discussing that in the future once I have done a little bit more analysis on that and honed that analysis more specifically.
How does all this fit in with your outlook for energy markets and inflation after you pegged the December bottom for crude oil?
I think that we have a lot of converging factors coming into play over the next year or two that will also have a big impact on inflation and energy prices. Right now, I think that the crude market is in a broad trading range, that you had multi-month and multi-year cycles that peaked in September of last year. And then we were talking about in October, November, and I said what I needed to see for crude to set a bottom, a spike below $70. We got that right in mid-December as several weekly and monthly cycles were also converging. And in our last discussion, it was right around mid-December. I was saying how I thought, we were right at the bottom. But that tells me the bottom of a trading range that I think energy markets are going to swing within that trading range for a while. And then there's another time frame out in the third quarter of this year when I think we could see another spike low in some certain commodity inflation markets. But we're going to see, like I said, a lot of two-sided trading between now and then. And that would usher in what I think will be another larger phase of inflation due to some factors that might not even be on investors' radars right now. And that's something also we'll be looking to talk about in the future.
Eric, could you tell us a bit about Inside Track Trading?
Inside Track Trading is a research, analysis, and trading advisory service, and as probably gathered from this discussion, we focus on a lot of the financial markets, dealing with things like cycles and other broader analysis as the backdrop, but then utilizing some very specific technical tools and risk control, money management factors to generate specific expectations and trading strategies in the market. So we publish different publications and have different subscription offerings with providing that analysis to subscribers.
Eric, thank you so much for being on This Week in Money.
Thank you for having me back, Jim. My
guest has been Eric Hadik, CEO and president of InsideTrackTrading.com, Inside spelled INSIIDE. What is the story behind the double I's?
No, the whole Inside is originally an acronym for how I broke up the market sectors that I was focusing on and analyzing in the beginning almost 30 years ago, but it had to do with inflation, the IN, SI was stock indexes, second I was interest rates, D was dollar and currencies, E was energy. And so that was the acronym of how things were originally structured in the publications. It's evolved since then, but the acronym has stuck.
Thanks a lot again.
Thank you, Jim. Have a good weekend.
My guest, Eric Hadik. And that wraps up our show for this week. We'd like to thank our guests, Ross Clark, Martin Armstrong, and Eric Hadik. And thank you for listening. If you have any questions for the show or for our guests, you can send them to info@HowStreet.com. Now stand by for a company showcase update from RecycLiCo CEO Zarko Meseldzija. I'm Jim Goddard. We'll be back next week with more This Week in Money.
Comments made on This Week in Money are an expression of opinion only and should not be construed in any manner whatsoever as recommendations to buy or sell any financial instrument at any time. Archived online at TalkDigitalNetwork.com. This Week in Money is a production of How Street Media Incorporated. Executive producer is Tom Allen. Welcome to Company Showcase, an advertising feature on HowStreet.com.
I'm Jim Goddard. My guest is Zarko Meseldzija, Chief Executive Officer of RecycLiCo. Zarko, welcome back to your first Company Showcase of the new year.
Thank you, Jim.
So, obviously, you are very optimistic going into the new year. What do you have planned?
Well, definitely optimistic going into the new year. I don't think markets are, or some news outlets are, because lately there's been a lot of negative news about the future of electric vehicles, which just sounds ridiculous to me. You know, a lot of EV and battery companies are dealing with, certain commodity price pressures, supply chain issues, and a tough economy. So a slowdown in production and deliveries compared to their previous year's production is expected, but by no means does it signal kind of an end to electric vehicles. These kind of times create better companies in my mind. And just kind of take a look at the investments being made into the electric vehicle future, right? This week, it was Honda that reported. It wasn't Honda that reported, but it was reported that Honda is considering an $18.4 billion electric vehicle and battery plant in Canada, and just add that on top of the other multiple other billion-dollar investments announced in Canada alone. So, I'm optimistic, right? You can't look at things day to day. You have to look at things long term, and some things may seem to slow down now, but the future is a lot brighter. And then on another note, I don't think The markets don't seem to think so, but our latest press release where our lithium carbonate was successfully tested in LFP battery cells was excellent news in my mind, and one that demonstrates our technical capabilities. There are a lot of recycling companies out there, but you don't hear about battery grade quality or cell testing or successful cell testing often. And I know many listeners are always curious of who the companies we are working with are, but I think the key takeaways sometimes to press releases like these should be our technical capabilities and the fact that companies are working with us. Because just kind of, I know we all want to know kind of where is their potential business, but kind of put yourself in the shoes of the other companies. And if you were them, would you want to publicly disclose that you are working with a recycling company or investigating, recycling technologies which would then perk the interest of your competitors and maybe lose an advantage that you've been working on, right? So when you look at these perspectives, I think it's harder to argue why some of these decisions are made, and I think what we're really trying to showcase in our press releases is the technical capabilities. But I think also with that press release, testing LFP battery cells is also a very relevant topic, as many companies are opting to use LFP cells in their EVs due to their lower cost. But from a recycler's point of view, there's no nickel, cobalt, and manganese value to recover. So as a recycler, your process needs to be even more efficient to extract as much lithium and as high of a quality as possible with the lowest possible cost. Now, couple that with lower commodity prices that we've been experiencing this past year, and I think with time, the market naturally sidelines less efficient technologies. The inevitable future is that we will need battery recycling, so that's not going to go away. But the market shifts in battery chemistry or lower commodity prices will only act as a filter. So, we keep adding on top of our technical capabilities. Having our lithium carbonate used in LFP cells is great because, LFP cells are increasing market share. They'll be used first, and then, there's a lot of lithium in there to recycle for value as well. That we're looking at as well. But when it comes to our technology, I think what really proves a strong technology and what really makes it evident is when multiple patent offices also recognize the novelty of your invention. And, it was great capping off the end of the year in 2023 with an official communication from the European Patent Office indicating that their intention to grant our patent. So to date, we have patents issued in the U.S., Canada, South Korea, Japan, China, India, and Australia, with Europe being the last one from our original application. I know many listeners were kind of asking a few months ago why we haven't gone Europe yet, but really the timing of each office's review is different, and to be honest, out of our control. We can only just help with answering any questions that they may have. But now the next step is to select individual countries in Europe for validation, which will be strategic given how much news there is in Europe on investments in battery plants and just making sure we protect our patents in those regions. But it is moving on. I think it's one thing to have a great technology, but the next step is going to be commercialization. And on that note, work is underway as we've reported before in the past, with our RecycLiCo Zenith JV in Taiwan. And work is underway on multiple fronts. First, there's the planning for the modular construction. While we're doing this work, we're already having conversations with potential commercial partners in the short and long term for that Taiwan operation. I think we meet on quite a regular basis. We, as in RecycLiCo and Zenith, meet on a regular basis, and our planned commercial plant has been very well received, I would say, in the Asia market, which I believe can open up many more doors as well for us. And I think I have some other questions here, but one I wanted to also address is a very frequent question on revenue. And I think just to be straightforward on revenue is that, we are a pre-revenue company now, and revenue is projected from commercial operations, with our first commercial operation being the Taiwan JV, which we don't expect to be in operation this year, or which will not be in operation this year. When we do begin to commission our commercial operation in Taiwan and come closer to that operational point, we will have a better sense of timing of revenue, right? That's also going to be dependent on commodity prices and a lot of different factors as well, closer to that time. But what to expect from us as we work on that first JV in Taiwan is that we are actively seeking other suitable JV partners, in Europe and North America as well. So it's not just going to be one JV and then sign the second JV, but in parallel, we are looking at multiple JVs to begin working on. And finally, as another piece of kind of industry news, I know this was last month, going into the holidays, but China announced export restrictions and control on critical minerals that are making it difficult for EV manufacturers. So, for example, China announced it will require a special export license for battery-grade graphite. And, for example, we always talk about cathode material, precursor, lithium, that's all on the cathode side. But on the anode side is dominantly graphite, right? And then in black mass, which is the product of end-of-life batteries, you also get those anode components in there. So there's about 40% roughly a graphite carbon content in black mass from our analysis of multiple samples of black mass that we've tested. So it is an important piece in the fully closed loop. And RecycLiCo's patented process does separate graphite and carbon from black mass. However, to unlock the maximum value of that black mass, we are looking at investigating opportunities of upcycling the graphite as well into high purity products that could be usable in new batteries, and which I think became a lot more relevant with China's recent export restrictions. So, we are aware of geopolitical situations going on. We are aware of new technologies, kind of always staying on top of that, right? I think even with NanoRamic, right, and the news we had there, we talked about, NanoRamic is an advanced technology, so we're kind of always saying that one step ahead of the industry and making sure we're kind of paving the way for recycling and know what's going on in this in the industry. So there's always tons of news to read, and to me, it's more positive than negative. That's all I have for listeners today, Jim.
Zarko, for people new to RecycLiCo, what does the company do, and where are you traded?
Yeah, I guess if you couldn't tell from the long discussion, RecycLiCo is all about lithium-ion battery recycling and upcycling. So taking waste lithium-ion batteries from, especially electric vehicles, now that we're seeing more on the road, and recovering that lithium, cobalt, nickel, and manganese, and looking at graphite from those waste batteries and promoting a circular economy. You can always find out more on our website on www.RecycLiCo.com. And we are a publicly traded company, so you can find more information on us there and follow our tickers, which are AMY, AMY on the TSXV, AMY.V on the TCQB, and we're ID4 on the Frankfurt Stock Exchange.
Zarko, thank you so much for the update.
Thanks, Jim. Talk to you next time.
My guest has been Zarko Meseldzija, Chief Executive Officer of RecycLiCo. I'm Jim Goddard. Our conversation took place on January 12th.
Comments made on Company Showcase are an expression of opinion only and should not be construed in any manner whatsoever as recommendations to buy or sell any financial instrument at any time. Archived online at HowStreet.com. Company Showcase is a production of How Street Media Incorporated.